All right, guys, to wrap up the conversation about the big fish available at the deadline, I've got kind of a surprise team. So we get through like New Jersey and Carolina. Those two definitely at the top make the most sense. But a team that has kind of just entered the sweepstakes for Timo Meier is the St. Louis Blues, which may come as kind of a surprise. And Chad, I know you've got a smirk on your face there because you sent this to me today, but I honestly, before you sent that to me on Instagram, I was already thinking about this and had heard it from a couple of hockey people a few times. Look, yes, the Blues have sold off a bit here, and definitely some more selling to come. We know that O'Reilly and Tarasenko and Achari and Mikkola are out the door. We expect Ivan Barbashev to get dealt as well. But now the Blues have given themselves some draft capital to play with. They've got 3 first-round picks in a very deep draft, and they could use that to their advantage. And now they have some cap flexibility as well. So with not having the desire to go through a long, grueling rebuild, they could go after a player like Timo Meier to jump into their core and kind of retool this team quickly. And so that is why I'm going to go with the St. Louis Blues. It's definitely an interesting one. I don't expect it to happen, but it would be quite something if it does happen, because we've seen this with Doug Armstrong before, where he makes a couple of big deals, he gets a ton of assets, and then he flips those assets to bring in other players that are going to help his team right away. And I think that there's a real possibility of that. He certainly is an aggressive GM, as we've seen, and he's not afraid to let big names go, as we've seen here, and going back to Pietrangelo, Perron, etc., and be aggressive and take big swings. So my deal, it's definitely a bit of a lesser return compared to you guys. I have to say that, with the cap flexibility that St. Louis has now, and fully expecting a player like Ivan Barbashev to head out the door at the deadline, no salary retention on San Jose's part for Timo Meier. So the whole deal goes to the St. Louis Blues, that final year of the $6 million. St. Louis is able to sign him right away to a long-term deal to join their core. And going back to the Sharks in the deal, a 2023 first-round pick. Again, they have 3 of those. So that gives San Jose another pick. And I think that there's a lot of desire for Mike Grier to have multiple first-rounders to move around the first round of the draft. Jimmy Snuggerud, a prospect, he goes the other way as well. He was a first-round pick in last year's draft. And, of course, I've got a connection with him. His dad, Dave, played for San Jose for 2 seasons back in his career. So he would certainly have a great resource to find out what San Jose is like. So Snuggerud, a first, and then one more piece, a second or a third in 2024. So kind of looking at this as a similar deal to the Alex DeBrincat one with Chicago and Ottawa, where it's a first, a second, and a third going to the Chicago Blackhawks for Alex DeBrincat, where in this case you've got 2 firsts essentially and a second or a third going to the San Jose Sharks from St. Louis for Timo Meier. So what do you guys think of this deal, guys?
Can't hear you, Case.
I can't hear. Yeah.
When it comes to the pieces going back to San Jose, I like it. And I think that San Jose would benefit from all of that, and it makes a ton of sense. But when it comes to the trade making sense in general, I don't like it. I did read about this San Jose or the St. Louis Blues possibly doing the reshaping and bringing in Meier, but I only think that really makes sense if this team didn't win a cup in 2018. They have all these picks now, and that's what this team needs. They're ranked the 29th prospect pool in the league by The Athletic, and they do not have a lot of guys even close. And then to think that Jimmy Snuggerud would have to be involved in this, he's probably their second best prospect, maybe first best. It's down to him and Bolduc. So I don't know if this team is in the position to be able to give up so many picks, especially because, the team isn't competing now, and they won't be able to compete for a long time if they give up all those picks as well. Whereas if you keep the picks, grab a ton of prospects in the next year or two, maybe 4 or 5 years later, those guys are all ready. And Kyrou, Robert Thomas, all those guys, they're in their prime. They're entering their prime at that time. So I think it would make a lot more sense for this team to hold on to these picks. And we've talked about this draft before and mentioned that the market is saying that second round picks are as highly valued as first round picks this year because it's such a deep draft. So having 3 first round picks, I think that's the best way to turn this team around within 5 years. And Timo Meier, sure, he's going to definitely make the team better right away. We've talked about how much we love this guy, but I don't know if San Jose or St. Louis has enough pieces around Timo Meier, Kyrou, and Robert Thomas for this to really make as much sense. Now, if they're really crazy and want to go reshaping like this or retooling, whatever the phrase you want to say, I like the trade, Harp. Like, the pieces are good. The trade is fair.
Personally, I don't think the package is enough to land Timo Meier, especially when we were talking about, especially that first package that Casey brought up from New Jersey, talking about Holtz and, Seamus Casey, a first, etc. I think there would need to be another piece bigger than a second round pick if they were going to land Timo Meier. But
say two first and a third.
Yeah, sure. Something like that. My problem with the trade case is kind of the same issues that you have with it, is that I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for this team. The problem is, if you acquire Timo Meier at the deadline, your team gets better. And then one of, your best first, actually, of the 3 picks, I guess you wouldn't even have it anymore, but that pick gets worse because your team gets better on the ice. So I just think it would be a complete mortgage of their future. And that's not a good thing for a team who really, aside from Kyrou and Thomas, like you mentioned, Case, they don't have very many prospects coming up. And then to give away Snuggerud would just be, again, kind of just mortgaging their future. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense for the team. I see why people are saying that they could be in on Meier just because they have so many assets right now. Yeah. But I just think if you want to rebuild and do things properly, a 2 to 5 year plan is way better than getting Timo Meier, getting better on the ice, having worse draft picks and fewer draft picks. Because also, too, talking about how second rounders this year are as valuable as firsts in previous years, they don't have a second round pick this year. They only have the 3 firsts. So even if one of those goes, that's some massive draft capital that they're giving up.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to restate my point that if they didn't win a cup within the last 5 years, this makes more sense to me. But that recent history kind of throws that out in my mind. But yeah, if it wasn't for 2018, I'm saying sure, why not go for it?
Yeah, well, think about, imagine this were the Washington Capitals, right? Kind of in a similar situation, not really because the Caps have been better than the Blues this year, but coming into this season, kind of in a similar situation. They won a cup a few years ago, and now their core is aging, and, they're trying to compete for the playoffs. Washington obviously doing a better job than St. Louis. But if this was Washington and they were on the outside looking in, maybe it makes sense to kind of mortgage your future a bit to make one final push or a couple more pushes with the core that you already have. But for this young team in St. Louis, well, I say young because I'm referring to Kyrou and Thomas, who are 2 of their young stars. I just don't think it makes sense to go all in right now and get Timo Meier.
No, for sure. And I think that the most what makes the most sense is to use all of those 3 first-round picks, or package one of them to get a couple of seconds or whatever in a very strong draft. But I could see this happening. Like, we know how Doug Armstrong is. He's aggressive, and just this market not really having the appetite for a long, grueling rebuild. And one other young player who I think will end up being a big part of this team is Jake Neighbors, that we haven't really mentioned. So you can throw him in there as well. But this would be certainly crazy to see. And again, I could have gone a couple of different ways. I could have gone with Vegas or Winnipeg, but Winnipeg is kind of tough because I don't see Meier signing there long term. And then with Vegas, I don't think Mike Greer and the Sharks would have an appetite to trade him within their division to an organization that they don't particularly like, as we've seen.
Quite the rivalry.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, that doesn't make sense. And I think that the return from Vegas would have to be all worldly to land Timo Meier, just because it's Vegas and, the rivalry there and being in the same division. So I said, you know what, why not? I'll go with St. Louis because Doug Armstrong is aggressive and he is not afraid to take big swings. But I would agree, it would be cool if it happened, but it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Blues.